I married a man who promised me nothing but a roof and a grave. Lydia Cross stood in the doorway of a stranger's ranch, her empty stomach screaming louder than her pride. Behind her, starvation. Ahead, a man whose eyes held all the warmth of a January storm. Ethan Cole didn't want a wife. He wanted hired help who'd stay put. 2 orphaned boys needed raising. She needed to eat. No flowers, no promises. Just a handshake that felt like a death sentence. But what Lydia didn't know, this frozen bargain would either kill her or make her more alive than she'd ever been. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this tale has traveled. The wind that cut through Montana territory in February of 1882 didn't just chill, it accused. It found every hole in Lydia Cross's coat, every weak seam, every place where the fabric had given up long before she had. She'd been walking for 2 days, her boots leaving tracks in snow that filled them back in like the world was trying to erase her. She wasn't supposed to be here. She was supposed to be in a schoolhouse in Denver teaching grammar to children whose parents paid in real money, not promises. But the school board had other ideas when they found out she'd been letting the Mexican kids stay after hours for lessons. Inappropriate allocation of resources, they'd called it. She called it teaching. They called her dismissed. The last of her savings got her a train ticket north and a week in a boarding house that smelled like boiled cabbage and defeat. Then that ran out too. The advertisement had been precise. Ranch hand needed. Must cook, clean, teach 2 boys. Room and board. Marriage required. No romance. Apply in person, Cole Ranch, 14 miles north of Bramble Creek. Marriage required. Like it was a skill set, same as cooking or mending. Lydia had read it 3 times, her tea going cold in a cup she'd have to return to the landlady who was already giving her looks that said, "Your time's up." She'd spent her whole life watching women vanish into marriages like they were walking into fog. Her own mother had done it, marrying a man who drank his wages and died angry. Lydia had sworn she'd never. But swearing didn't fill your stomach. The ranch appeared like a punishment at the end of a long white nothing. Buildings huddled together as if trying to stay warm, all of them looking like they'd been beaten by weather and neglect. Barn listing to one side. Fence posts at odd angles. A house that might have been proud once, but now just looked tired. She stopped at the gate, her hands too cold to feel the wood. Smoke came from the chimney at least. That meant people. That meant warm. The front door opened before she could knock. The man who filled the doorway wasn't old, but he looked like he'd lived too much. Maybe 35, maybe 40. Hard to tell when someone's face had been weathered down to essentials. Tall, broad through the shoulders in a way that came from work, not vanity. Dark hair needing a cut. Eyes the color of slate, just as hard and just as cold. "You lost?" His voice matched his eyes. "I'm here about the position." Lydia's voice came out steadier than she felt. "The advertisement in the Bramble Creek, that was 2 weeks ago. I came as soon as I could." He looked at her like she was a horse he was considering buying and finding wanting. His gaze took in her worn coat, her mud-caked boots, the carpet bag that held everything she owned and still wasn't full. "You look half dead." "I'm fine." "Fine, don't answer my question." She lifted her chin. "I'm capable. I can teach, cook, clean, manage a household. I have references. Don't care about references." He stepped back from the door but didn't exactly invite her in. Just made space. "You eat yet today?" The question caught her off guard. That's a no." He turned and walked into the house, leaving the door open. After a moment, Lydia followed. The interior was worse than the exterior. Not dirty exactly, but neglected. Dishes stacked by a basin, clothes draped over chairs, a pot-bellied stove radiating heat that felt like mercy. The whole place had the hollow feeling of a house where no one had cared about it being a home for a long time. "Sit." He pointed at a table that needed sanding. Lydia sat, her body making the decision before her pride could object. She watched him move around the kitchen with the efficiency of someone who'd learned to cook out of necessity, not pleasure. Bread, butter, something that looked like venison. He set it in front of her without ceremony. "Eat first, we'll talk after." She wanted to protest, wanted to maintain some dignity, but her hands were already reaching for the bread, and the first bite undid something in her chest she didn't know had been knotted. He sat across from her, didn't eat, just watched with those flat eyes while she tried not to devour everything like an animal. "Name's Ethan Cole," he said finally. "This is my ranch. Was my brother's ranch too, but he died 6 months back. Fever. Took his wife same time. Left me with 2 boys. Samuel's 8, Daniel's 5. They need raising. I need help. That's the situation." Lydia swallowed, forced herself to slow down. "The advertisement said marriage." "It did. Why?" For the first time, something that might have been humor crossed his face, though it didn't reach his eyes. "You gonna stay on a remote ranch with a man you're not married to? What's that say about you? What's that say about me? Boys need stability, not gossip. There are housekeepers who leave. Already went through 3. Boys get attached, woman gets a better offer, or decides this is too hard, she's gone. A wife stays, that's the contract. A business contract. That's right." Lydia set down the bread. Her stomach was still screaming for more, but she needed her hands steady. "What exactly are you offering? Room, board, a share of what the ranch produces? You teach the boys, keep the house, help with cooking and preserves. In return, you get my name, my protection, and you don't starve. I don't want your affection, don't want romance, don't need a woman making this complicated. And if I refuse?" He shrugged. "Then you walked 14 miles for nothing." The wind rattled the windows. Outside, the light was starting to fail, and with it, the temperature would drop further. Lydia thought about the $2 in her bag, about the boarding house that wouldn't take her back, about the school board that had made sure her name was mud in every district from here to California. "I need to meet the boys first." Ethan studied her for a long moment, then stood. "They're in the barn. Daniel's afraid of the house since his ma died in it. Samuel watches him, so they're out there most times." He led her across the yard, the snow crunching under their feet. The barn was warmer than expected, full of animal heat and the smell of hay. 2 small figures sat in the loft, visible through gaps in the boards. "Boys, come down." The older one appeared first, climbing down the ladder with careful precision. He had Ethan's coloring, but none of his size yet. All elbows and knees and watchful eyes. The younger one followed, smaller, rounder in the face, with hair that stuck up in ways that suggested no one had fought with it recently. They stood in front of Ethan like soldiers awaiting inspection. "This is Miss Cross. Might be staying on. Say hello." "Hello, Miss Cross," the older one said. His voice was flat, rehearsed. The younger one just stared. Lydia crouched down to their level, ignoring the protest from her cold, stiffened knees. "You must be Samuel and Daniel." "Sam?" the older boy corrected. "Nobody calls me Samuel except when I'm in trouble." "Then I'll call you Sam." She looked at the younger one. "And you're Daniel." The boy's thumb was halfway to his mouth before Sam elbowed him. Daniel dropped his hand but didn't speak. "They tell me you've been sleeping out here," Lydia said, keeping her voice level. "That must be cold at night." "We got blankets," Sam said defensively. "We're fine." There was that word again. Fine. The way people said it when they meant the opposite. "I'm sure you are, but I bet it's warmer in the house. Ma died in there." This from Daniel, his voice small. "I know. That's a hard thing." Lydia didn't reach for them, didn't offer empty comfort. "Death doesn't stay in houses, though. It just visits and leaves. What stays is the people who are still living." Sam's eyes narrowed. "You gonna be our new ma?" "I don't know yet. That's what I'm here to figure out. The last lady said she'd stay. She left after 2 weeks." "Why?" Sam glanced at Ethan, then back to Lydia. "Said it was too hard, too far from town, too much work." "Was she right?" The boy blinked, surprised by the question. "I guess." "Then she made the right choice for her. Not everyone's built for this." Lydia stood, her knees cracking. "I haven't decided if I am yet either. That honest enough for you?" Something shifted in Sam's face. Not quite trust, but maybe the possibility of it. Back in the house, Ethan put the boys to bed in a room off the kitchen. Lydia heard their murmured protests, his low responses. When he returned, he poured 2 cups of coffee from a pot that looked like it had been there since morning. "They like you," he said. "They're suspicious of me. That's different." "Smart boys." Lydia wrapped her hands around the cup, letting the warmth seep in. "I need to understand something. You said marriage is required. What exactly does that mean? Ethan met her eyes directly. Means we stand in front of Reverend Matthews and say words. Means you get my name. Means you're protected under law as my wife. Means if something happens to me, you have claim to stay here. Take care of the boys. And what else does it mean? His jaw tightened. I got a room upstairs. You'll have the room down here, off the kitchen. Door's got a lock if you want to use it. I'm not asking for anything a hired hand wouldn't give, except permanence. You're asking me to tie my entire life to yours. And you're desperate enough to consider it. The bluntness should have insulted her. Instead, it was almost refreshing. No pretense. No pretty lies about affection growing or finding companionship. I won't be a servant, Lydia said. If I'm a wife, I make decisions about the house, the boys' education, how things are run domestically. Fine by me. I got enough to manage with the ranch. I want a horse of my own and access to town when I need it. Town's 14 miles. Winter makes it harder. Then I'll need to plan accordingly. Ethan almost smiled. Almost. You always this difficult? I'm not being difficult. I'm being clear. He drank his coffee, considered her. Anything else? If this doesn't work, if you decide you want me gone, or I decide I need to leave, I want enough money to get to the next town in a month to find a position. That's fair? He set down his cup. My turn. You don't undermine me in front of the boys. You don't make promises to them you can't keep. You don't leave without warning. Agreed? And you tell me now if there's any reason you can't do this. Man following you, debts, scandal, I don't care what it is, but I need to know. Lydia thought about the school board, about the superintendent who'd called her a troublemaker, about the letter of recommendation she'd forged because the truth would have left her unemployable. She thought about lies of omission and whether they counted. Nothing that'll follow me here, she said finally. It wasn't quite the truth, but it wasn't quite a lie either. Ethan nodded slowly. Reverend comes through Friday. That gives you 3 days to change your mind. It gives you 3 days too. I already made up my mind when I placed the advertisement. Why? Lydia leaned forward. Why marriage? Really? He was quiet for a long time, staring into his coffee like it held answers. When he spoke, his voice was rougher. My brother's wife, Margaret, she was good to those boys, patient, kind. When she got sick, she made me promise something. He paused. Made me promise I'd find them a mother who'd stay. Not just someone passing through, someone who'd choose them permanent-like. This is the only way I know how to make that happen. By trapping some desperate woman with a contract? By being honest about what this is. His eyes met hers, hard and unapologetic. You want me to lie? Pretend I'm offering romance and partnership and all that? I'm not. I'm offering survival, same as you're looking for. Lydia sat back, something twisting in her chest. He wasn't wrong. They were both just trying to survive, making the best of bad options. I'll give you an answer before Friday, she said. That night, Lydia lay in the small room off the kitchen, listening to the house settle and creak. The bed was narrow but clean, the blankets heavy and warm. Through the wall, she could hear the boys breathing in their sleep, Daniel making small sounds like he was dreaming. She thought about Denver, about the schoolhouse she'd loved and lost, about the superintendent's face when he'd told her that her excessive sympathy for undesirable elements made her unsuitable for employment, about the children who'd cried when she left, especially Rosa Martinez, who'd been reading at grade level for the first time in her life. She thought about her mother, who'd married at 16 to escape her own father's house, who told Lydia once that sometimes survival looked like surrender, but was actually just strategy. She thought about the two boys in the next room, half wild and half broken, and Ethan upstairs, alone in his dead brother's house. The wind howled outside and Lydia pulled the blankets tighter. In the morning, she woke to voices. I told you to be quiet. But she's sleeping in Ma's room. That ain't Ma's room anymore. Ma's gone. I know that. I'm not stupid. Lydia opened her eyes to find both boys in her doorway, Sam holding Daniel back by the collar of his nightshirt. Good morning, she said, sitting up. They both froze. We didn't mean to wake you, Sam said quickly. You didn't. I was already awake. She wasn't, but the lie seemed kinder. Is your uncle up? He's doing the morning feed. Sam let go of Daniel, who immediately moved closer to the door, peering in at her room like it was a museum exhibit. We're supposed to wait for him to make breakfast, but you're hungry now? Both boys nodded. Well, let's see what we can do about that. She dressed quickly, splashed water on her face from the basin, and emerged to find them sitting at the table, watching her with identical expressions of careful hope. The kitchen was a disaster by daylight, worse than she'd thought. Dishes crusted with old food, a layer of grime on every surface. The stove needed blacking, but there was flour, eggs, a bit of bacon. She cooked, and they watched her like she might vanish if they blinked. You know how to make pancakes? Daniel asked, his voice awed. I do. Ma used to make them on Sundays. Then maybe we'll make them on Sundays too. Sam's eyes narrowed. You staying then? Haven't decided yet, but you're cooking. People need to eat whether I stay or not. Daniel climbed up onto his chair, kneeling so he could see over the table edge. Are you a teacher? Uncle Ethan said you might be our teacher. I was a teacher in Denver. Why'd you stop? Daniel? Sam started, but Lydia held up a hand. It's all right. I stopped because sometimes grown-ups make decisions that don't make sense to anyone but them. The people in charge decided they didn't want me teaching anymore. Why not? Because I taught children they thought weren't important enough to teach. Daniel frowned, processing this. That's stupid. Daniel! Sam looked mortified, but Lydia smiled, the first real smile in weeks. You're right. It was stupid. Ethan came in while they were eating, stopping short at the sight of the three of them at the table together. His hair was damp with snow, his face red with cold. They bothering you? He asked. They're eating breakfast. That's not bothering. That's being human. He grunted, hung up his coat, and joined them. For a few minutes, there was just the sound of eating, the scrape of forks on plates. It should have been awkward, but somehow it wasn't. It was just quiet. Sam, Ethan said finally, you and Daniel need to muck out the stalls after breakfast. Yes, sir. And after that, I want you to show Miss Cross where we keep the preserves, the root cellar, the hen house. She should know where things are. Sam looked at Lydia, then back to Ethan. Why? Because I said so. But the boy was smarter than that. His eyes widened slightly. She's staying? That's up to her. 4 pairs of eyes turned to Lydia. She set down her fork, her heart doing something complicated in her chest. I need to ask you all something, she said slowly. And I need honest answers, not what you think I want to hear. The boys nodded. Ethan just waited. If I stay, and I haven't decided yet, but if I do, it means a lot of changes. It means I'll be making decisions about how this house runs, about what the boys learn, what time they go to bed, how things are cleaned and cooked. It means I won't be a guest here. I'll be... She hesitated over the word. I'll be family. And family means I'll expect things from you just like you'll expect things from me. Can you handle that? What kind of things? Sam asked suspiciously. Chores done when I ask. Lessons completed. Truthfulness. Respect. We already do chores. When your uncle remembers to tell you, I won't forget. Daniel looked worried. Will you hit us if we're bad? The question landed like a stone. Lydia looked at Ethan, whose face had gone carefully blank. No, she said firmly. I don't hit children, ever. But I will give consequences. Extra chores, earlier bedtimes, loss of privileges. Fair? What privileges? Sam asked. We don't got any. Well, then I'll have to create some so I can take them away. She almost smiled. What about you, Ethan? Can you handle having someone make decisions about the house? He studied her over his coffee cup. Long as you can handle me making decisions about the ranch. Deal. Just like that? Just like that. Daniel bounced in his seat. Does that mean you're staying? Does that mean you're going to be our ma? Lydia's throat tightened. I'm staying, but I won't be your ma. I'm not here to replace her. I'm here to be someone different. Someone who'll take care of you and teach you and make sure you grow up right. Is that enough? The boys looked at each other, having some kind of silent conversation only brothers could have. Finally, Sam nodded. That's enough, he said quietly. Ethan stood, carried his plate to the basin. I'll ride to town this morning. Tell Reverend Matthews we'll need him Friday. You change your mind before then, you let me know. I won't change my mind. He paused at the door, looked back at her. For just a moment, something that might have been relief crossed his face. Then it was gone, locked back behind that wall of stone. Good, was all he said. The next 3 days passed in a blur of activity that left Lydia exhausted and more alive than she'd felt in months. She cleaned the house room by room, the boys helping with varying degrees of enthusiasm. She took inventory of the pantry, the root cellar, the preserves that Margaret had put up before she got sick. She found a trunk in the boys' room filled with their mother's things, dresses, a hairbrush, letters tied with ribbon. Sam watched her discover it with the wariness of a guard dog. "We're keeping that," he said immediately. "Of course you are, but maybe we could put it somewhere safer. The attic or a closet. Somewhere it won't get damaged, but you can look at it whenever you want?" He considered this. "The closet in your room, the one you're not using." "Perfect." They moved it together and Lydia noticed the way Sam's hands lingered on the trunk, the way Daniel pressed his face to one of the dresses and breathed in deep. "She smelled like lavender," Daniel said softly. "Then we'll plant lavender in the spring," Lydia said. "Would you like that?" Daniel nodded, not trusting his voice. That night, Lydia started lessons. Nothing formal, just reading by the fire while the boys listened. Sam was more advanced than she'd expected, clearly taught by someone who'd cared. Daniel knew his letters but struggled with sounding out words. "I'm stupid at reading," he announced. "You're 5. You're not supposed to be good at it yet." Sam was good at it when he was 5. Sam's not you. You'll be good at things Sam's not good at, too. That's how people work. Ethan came in while she was helping Daniel through a simple primer, stopping to listen from the doorway. When she looked up, he was watching them with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You're good with them," he said later, after the boys had gone to bed. "They're good boys. They just need consistency." Margaret used to say that. He poured coffee, offered her a cup. "She'd have liked you, I think." It was the most personal thing he'd said to her. Lydia took the coffee, let the warmth seep into her hands. "Tell me about her?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "She was my brother James's wife. They met back east, came out here together to homestead. She hated it at first, the isolation, the weather, how hard everything was. But she stuck it out, learned to love it eventually. She could shoot better than James, rode like she'd been born on a horse. Boys adored her. And you? I respected her. She made James happy. That was enough." "Were you close? You and your brother?" His jaw tightened. "We had our moments. He was older, always thought he knew better. But when it counted, we looked out for each other." "I'm sorry you lost them." "Being sorry doesn't change anything." He set down his cup hard enough that coffee sloshed. "I need to check the fence line before dark. You need anything from town tomorrow? I'll be going in after the wedding to file the papers." "Papers?" "Marriage certificate, making it legal." "Right, because this was a contract, not a romance." "No," Lydia said. "I don't need anything." Friday came too fast and not fast enough. Lydia woke before dawn, her stomach in knots. She had one good dress, dark blue wool, that had seen better days but was clean and pressed. She did her hair simply, no fuss, no pretense. When she emerged from her room, she found Ethan in the kitchen, already dressed in what must have been his Sunday clothes. Dark trousers, a white shirt, a vest that was slightly too tight across the shoulders. His hair was slicked back, his face freshly shaved. He looked uncomfortable and grim. "You look nice," she said, because someone should say it. "So do you." He said it like he was commenting on the weather. The boys tumbled out of their room, excited despite themselves. This was the most interesting thing that had happened in months. "Are we going to town?" Daniel asked. "No, Reverend's coming here." "Why can't we go to town? I want to see—" "Because I said so." Reverend Matthews arrived at 10, a thin man with kind eyes and cold hands that he warmed by the fire while making small talk about the weather. He'd brought 2 witnesses, a rancher named Tucker from 5 miles south and his wife Helen, who looked at Lydia with open curiosity. "Ethan, you old dog," Tucker said, clapping him on the shoulder. "Didn't think you'd ever take the plunge again." Again. Lydia filed that away for later. The ceremony was brief and perfunctory. They stood in front of the fireplace, the boys watching from the sofa like this was a theater performance. Reverend Matthews read from a worn Bible, his voice steady and practiced. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered." Lydia barely heard the words. Her focus was on Ethan's hands, calloused and scarred, as he took hers. On the way, his jaw was clenched so tight she thought he might crack a tooth. On the absolute absence of anything resembling joy in his eyes. This wasn't a beginning. This was just two people making the best of bad circumstances. "Do you, Ethan Cole, take this woman?" "I do." His voice was flat, matter-of-fact, like he was agreeing to purchase cattle. "Do you, Lydia Cross, take this man?" She looked at the boys. At Sam, who was watching her with those careful eyes. At Daniel, who'd started calling her Miss Lydia like she was already part of them. At this house that needed so much work. At this life that wasn't anything she'd planned. "I do." Then by the power vested in me. And just like that, she was married. Lydia Cole. A wife to a man who didn't want her. A mother to boys who'd already lost one. Tucker produced a bottle of whiskey for a toast. Helen kissed Lydia's cheek and whispered, "He's a good man, just buried under all that grief. Give him time." Time. As if that's all it would take. They signed the papers Tucker and Helen witnessed, and it was done. Legal, binding, real. After they left, the boys went to play in the barn, some instinct telling them the adults needed space. Lydia and Ethan stood in the kitchen, the silence stretching between them like a chasm. "Well," Ethan said finally. "That's that." "That's that," Lydia echoed. He pulled an envelope from his pocket, handed it to her. "This is yours. $50. In case." She looked down at it, understanding. Her escape money. The thing they'd agreed on. Enough to get her to the next town if this didn't work. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. "Take it anyway. I'm a man of my word." She took the envelope, tucked it into her pocket. It felt like a stone. That night, Ethan went upstairs to his room. Lydia went to hers. The boys were asleep in between, breathing softly. The house settled around them, creaking and sighing. Lydia lay in her narrow bed, now legally married to a man she barely knew, responsible for 2 children who'd been strangers a week ago, trapped in a life she'd never wanted in a place she'd never planned to be. And the strangest part? She didn't feel trapped at all. She felt like maybe, possibly, for the first time in her life, she'd made a choice that was entirely her own. Even if it was the strangest choice anyone had ever made. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, the fire burned low. And Lydia Cole, not Cross anymore, Cole, closed her eyes and let herself believe that survival might be enough. For now, at least. It would have to be. The first week passed in a blur of small failures and smaller victories. Lydia burned the bacon on day 2, overcooked the beans on day 3, and learned on day 4 that Ethan liked his coffee strong enough to strip paint. The boys circled her like wolves assessing wounded prey. Ben cautiously curious, Sam waiting for her to prove him right about leaving. She scrubbed floors that fought back, mended clothes that seemed to tear faster than she could fix them, and discovered the house had problems she hadn't seen at first glance. A leak in the corner of the parlor, a door that wouldn't close right, windows that let in drafts no amount of rags could stop. The place wasn't falling apart, but it was tired. Everything here was tired. On the 5th morning, she found Sam in the kitchen before dawn trying to make breakfast. He'd cracked eggs into a pan with shells and all, and was staring at the mess like it had personally betrayed him. "Let me help," Lydia said quietly. "I don't need help." His voice was hard, but his hand shook. "I can see that." She moved to the stove anyway, fishing out the shells with a spoon. "Your mother teach you to cook?" "She tried." Sam's jaw clenched. "I wasn't paying attention. Thought I had time to learn later." The admission hung between them, raw and painful. Lydia added milk to the eggs, whisking smooth. "Well, you've got time now, if you want." "Why would you teach me?" "Because you're trying," Lydia said. "That counts for something." He didn't answer, but he didn't leave either. Just watched as she showed him how to scramble eggs properly, how to know when the pan was hot enough, how to keep them from sticking. When they were done, he took a bite and nodded once. "Better than mine," he admitted grudgingly. "Practice helps," Lydia said. "Tomorrow morning you try again. I'll just watch." Something flickered in his eyes. Not trust, not yet, but maybe the shadow of a possibility. He took his plate and left without another word, but Lydia counted it as progress. Ben was easier in some ways, harder in others. He followed her around like a lost puppy, asking endless questions. Why did she braid her hair that way? Did she know any songs? Could she read? What was St. Louis like? Had she ever seen the ocean? The questions poured out of him like water from a cracked dam, and Lydia answered each one as honestly as she could. But at night, she could hear him crying through the thin walls. Soft, muffled sounds that tore at something in her chest. She never mentioned it, never acknowledged she could hear. Some grief was private, even when it echoed. Ethan was the hardest to read. He worked from before sunrise to after dark, coming in only for meals and falling into bed exhausted. He spoke in short sentences, asked for nothing, and thanked her for even less. But he noticed things. When she moved the coffee tin to a lower shelf so she could reach it easier, he didn't comment, just started pouring from the new spot. When she mentioned needing more flour, a 100-pound sack appeared by the door the next morning. He was a man of actions, not words. Lydia was learning to read both. On the 8th day, she decided to tackle the parlor. It was cluttered with things that had no home. Tools, papers, odds and ends that had accumulated like snow in corners. She started sorting, organizing, creating systems. That's when she found the trunk. It was shoved in the back corner, covered with a worn quilt. Lydia almost left it alone, but something made her look inside. Dresses. Women's dresses, neatly folded, smelling faintly of lavender. Sarah's dresses. Sarah's things. She was still kneeling there, hands frozen on the soft fabric of a blue cotton dress, when Ethan found her. "What are you doing?" His voice was sharp. "I'm sorry." Lydia stood quickly. "I was cleaning and I didn't mean to." "Those are Sarah's." He said it flat, like stating a fact about the weather. "I know. I'll leave them." "No." Ethan crossed the room, looked down at the trunk. "She's been gone 16 months. Keeping her clothes in a corner doesn't bring her back." He pulled out the blue dress, held it up. "This would fit you. Take it." "Ethan, I can't." "You need clothes. These are just taking up space." He thrust the dress at her. "Take them all. Alter what doesn't fit. Burn what you can't use. I don't care. Just get them out of my sight." The words came out harsh, but his hands trembled slightly when he dropped the dress into her arms. Lydia understood then. It wasn't callousness. It was survival. He couldn't keep living in a house full of ghosts. "All right," she said softly. "I'll take care of it." He left without another word. Lydia folded the blue dress carefully and started going through the trunk. There were 7 dresses, 2 coats, several shawls, and a box of ribbons. At the bottom, wrapped in paper, she found a photograph. A woman with dark hair and a gentle smile, holding a baby. 2 little boys stood beside her, younger versions of Sam and Ben. Sarah Cole, frozen in time, looking happy. Lydia stared at the photograph for a long time. This was the woman she was supposed to replace. This was the mother the boys mourned. This was the wife Ethan had loved. She carefully placed the photograph back in the trunk, under everything else. The clothes she could use. The memory belonged to them. That night at dinner, Sam noticed she was wearing the blue dress. His fork stopped halfway to his mouth. "That's Ma's," he said. "It was," Lydia agreed. "Your father said I could have her things. I altered this one to fit." Sam's face went hard. "You can't just take her place." "I'm not trying to." Lydia met his eyes. "I'm just trying not to freeze. There's a difference." "You look like her," Ben said softly. "A little. In that dress." "Ben, shut up," Sam snapped. "I'm just saying." "Well, don't." Ethan's hand hit the table. Not hard, but sharp enough to stop the argument. "Enough. She needs clothes. Sarah's not using them. That's the end of it." The meal continued in silence. But later, when Lydia was cleaning up, Ben appeared at her elbow. "I'm sorry Sam was mean," he whispered. "He's not mean," Lydia said. "He's hurting. That's different." "Do you miss your ma?" The question caught her off guard. "She died when I was very young. I barely remember her." "That's sad." "Sometimes," Lydia agreed. "But I had my father for a long time. That helped." "Where's he now?" "He died too, about a year ago." Ben processed this. "So you're alone, like us." "I suppose I am," Lydia said. "Or I was. Now I'm here." Are you glad? Ben asked. That you're here? Lydia looked around the kitchen, at the stove she was learning to manage, the dishes she'd washed 100 times already, the table where this strange family ate together. Ask me again in a month, she said honestly. Ben smiled a little. Okay, I will. The teaching started on day 10. Lydia had been watching the boys, assessing what they knew, what they'd forgotten, what they'd never learned. Sam could read well enough, but his writing was messy. Ben knew his letters, but stumbled over words longer than one syllable. Neither had done much arithmetic since their mother died. She set up a schoolroom in the corner of the parlor, using a trunk as a desk and boards across crates as seats. It wasn't much, but it was something. An hour every morning, she announced at breakfast. Reading, writing, arithmetic. We don't have time, Sam said immediately. There's chores. Chores come after lessons, Lydia said. Pa? Sam looked to his father for rescue. Ethan sipped his coffee. She's right. You need learning, but no arguments. Ethan's tone left no room for debate. You do what she says. Sam's glare could have melted iron, but he showed up the next morning with Ben trailing behind. Lydia had prepared lessons, had books ready, had a plan. It fell apart in the first 5 minutes. Sam refused to write, claiming his hand hurt. Ben couldn't sit still, bouncing and fidgeting until his chair nearly tipped. When Lydia asked Sam to read aloud, he read so fast the words blurred together, clearly trying to get it over with. Slower, Lydia said. I'm reading it right. You're reading it fast. That's not the same thing. It's good enough. It's not. Lydia took the book, marked a passage. Again, slower this time. I want to hear every word. Sam's jaw clenched, but he read again, slower but dripping with resentment. When he finished, Lydia nodded. Better. Now tell me what it meant. What? Well, what did you just read? What happened in that passage? Sam blinked. I don't know. Some guy did something. So you didn't understand it. I read it. You said the words, Lydia corrected, but you didn't read it. Reading means understanding. Try again. They went back and forth for 20 minutes before Sam finally, grudgingly, started to actually comprehend what he was reading. Ben watched the whole exchange with wide eyes, absorbing the lesson in his brother's stubbornness. When the hour was up, both boys fled like rabbits from a trap. Lydia sat in the makeshift schoolroom and pressed her fingers to her temples. This was going to be harder than she thought. But the next day, she tried again. And the day after that. Slowly, incrementally, she started to see progress. Sam's reading smoothed out. Ben learned to sound out longer words. They complained less, or at least complained more quietly. On day 14, Sam voluntarily showed her something he'd written. A story about a horse, barely half a page, but the first thing he'd written without being forced. Lydia read it carefully. This is good, she said. It's stupid. No, it's good. Your descriptions are clear. I can picture the horse. Sam shrugged, but she saw the corner of his mouth twitch, almost a smile. The winter deepened. Snow fell in sheets, wind howled through gaps in the walls, and the work never stopped. Lydia learned to carry water without spilling, to split kindling without smashing her fingers more than occasionally, to judge when the bread was ready by smell alone. Her hands, soft from years of city life, grew calloused and rough. Her back ached constantly. She fell into bed each night too exhausted to dream. But something was building, something fragile and tentative, like ice forming on a pond. Ben started calling her Lydia instead of Miss Lydia. Small victory, but she felt it. Sam stopped looking at her like she might vanish any second. Smaller victory, harder won. And Ethan? Ethan was harder to read. But one night, 3 weeks in, he spoke to her after the boys had gone to bed. You're doing good with them, he said, not looking up from the harness he was mending. They're doing the work, Lydia said. I'm just making them. Still. He set down his tools. Sarah used to teach them. She was better at it, but you're doing good. It was the first time he'd voluntarily mentioned Sarah's name to her. The first time he'd compared them. Lydia didn't know how to respond. Thank you, she said finally. He nodded and went back to his mending, but something had shifted. Some wall had developed a crack. The crisis came on day 26. Lydia woke to Ben screaming, not crying, screaming. She was out of bed and in the boys' room before she was fully conscious, Ethan right behind her. Ben was sitting up in bed, eyes wide and unseeing, screaming at something only he could see. Sam was trying to shake him awake, panic written across his face. "Ben!" Sam's voice cracked. "Wake up! You're dreaming!" Lydia moved to the bed, pulled Ben into her arms. "Shh! You're safe. You're here. You're safe." "Ma!" Ben sobbed against her shoulder. "Ma, don't go. Please don't go." "I'm here," Lydia said automatically, then froze. Wrong thing to say. Wrong person. But Ben was clinging to her, shaking, and she couldn't let go. "She can't breathe," Ben wailed. "She's trying to breathe and she can't and nobody's helping." "It was a dream," Lydia said firmly. "Just a dream. You're awake now. You're safe." Slowly, Ben's screaming subsided into hiccuping sobs. He clung to Lydia like she was the only solid thing in a tilting world. Over his head, she met Ethan's eyes. He looked wrecked. "He has nightmares," Sam said quietly, "about when Ma died, when she couldn't breathe." "How often?" Lydia asked. "Couple times a week," Sam said. "Sometimes more." "And you just deal with it alone?" Sam shrugged. "Pa's always working, and I'm the oldest." Lydia looked at this 9-year-old boy who'd been carrying more weight than any child should, and something fierce twisted in her chest. "Not anymore," she said. "From now on, if Ben has a nightmare, you get me. Or your father. You don't handle this alone. Understand?" Sam looked like he wanted to argue, but Ethan spoke first. "She's right. You should have told me it was this bad." "You had enough to worry about," Sam said. "That's not your decision to make." Ethan's voice was rough. "You're 9, Sam. You're not supposed to be the adult." Sam's face crumpled for just a second before he locked it down. "I'm fine." "No, you're not," Lydia said gently. "None of us are. But we can be not fine together. That's what families do." The word hung in the air. Family. Was that what they were? Ben had finally stopped crying, exhausted. He was still pressed against Lydia, half asleep now, his breathing evening out. "I'll stay with him," Lydia said. "You two get some sleep." "You sure?" Ethan asked. "I'm sure." Sam hesitated, then climbed back into his own bed. Ethan lingered in the doorway for a moment, looking at his sons, at Lydia holding Ben. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Don't thank me yet," Lydia said. "We've still got a long night ahead." But she stayed, holding Ben until he fell into deeper sleep, then sitting in the chair between the beds just in case. At some point she dozed off, waking to gray morning light and the sound of Sam moving around. He was getting dressed, quiet so as not to wake Ben. When he saw Lydia awake, he froze. "You stayed," he said. "I said I would." People say lots of things, but his voice held less edge than usual. "I know," Lydia said. "That's why what we do matters more than what we say." Sam studied her for a long moment. Then, so quietly she almost missed it. "Thanks." He left before she could respond. But when she came down to make breakfast, she found he'd already started the coffee. It was terrible, too weak, barely brown, but he'd tried. That counted. The days continued to stack up. 30 days, 40. The calendar moved toward February, and Lydia realized with a start that she'd been here over a month. That she'd kept her promise to Ben. She'd stayed. The house slowly transformed under her hands. Not dramatically, not perfectly, but noticeably. Floors stayed cleaner, meals improved. The boys' lessons became routine rather than battle. She planted herbs in pots on the windowsill, their green shoots a promise of spring still months away. And bit by bit, she learned the rhythms of this place. Learned that Ethan's silences weren't rejection, just how he processed the world. Learned that Sam tested every boundary to see if it would hold. Learned that Ben needed touch, needed physical reassurance that people were real and present. She learned herself, too. Learned she was stronger than she'd thought. That hunger had made her weak but hadn't broken her. That she could do hard things if the alternative was giving up. One morning in early February, she was making bread when Ethan came in from the barn, covered in snow. "Storm's coming," he said. "Big one. Can you help me bring in extra wood?" "Of course." They worked together, hauling logs from the woodpile to stack in the mudroom. The wind was already picking up, sharp and mean. Lydia's hands went numb, but she kept working. Ethan noticed. Go inside, he said. I'll finish. I can help. Your fingers are turning blue. Inside. She wanted to argue, but he was right. She went in, thawed her hands by the stove, and watched through the window as Ethan finished alone. He moved with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times, who knew exactly how much wood they'd need to survive whatever was coming. When he came back in, she had coffee ready. He took it gratefully, warming his hands on the cup. Thank you, he said, for helping. That's what I'm here for, isn't it? Is it? He looked at her directly, really looked at her, for maybe the first time since she'd arrived. Is that all you're here for? The question caught her off guard. I don't know what you mean. You could just do the minimum, Ethan said. Cook enough to feed us, clean enough to keep us from drowning in filth, teach the boys enough to satisfy the law. But you don't. You fix things. You make things better. You stayed up all night with Ben when you didn't have to. You're teaching Sam to cook even though he fights you on everything. He paused. So I'm asking, is this just a job to you, or is it something else? Lydia didn't know how to answer. She'd come here to survive. That was still true. But somewhere along the way, survival had started looking different, had started feeling like something other than just not dying. I don't know, she admitted. I came here because I had nowhere else to go. That hasn't changed. But I'm here now. These are my days. This is my work. You and the boys are my... She struggled for the word. My responsibility. I take that seriously. Responsibility? Ethan repeated. That all it is? What else would it be? He didn't answer, just drank his coffee and looked out at the gathering storm. When he spoke again, his voice was careful. Sam's starting to trust you. So's Ben. They're starting to think you might stay. I will stay, Lydia said. I told them I would. Winter doesn't last forever. Come spring, you'll have options. Could leave. Find something better. Better than what? Than this. He gestured around the kitchen, at the house, at everything. Then a loveless marriage to a stranger. Then raising someone else's kids. Then working yourself to death on a failing ranch. Is it failing? Lydia asked. Not yet, but it's close some days. She thought about that, about the work still undone, the repairs still needed, the endless battle against entropy. Then we'll keep it from failing. We? You need help. I can help. That's the arrangement. Right. Something flickered across his face, gone too fast to read. The arrangement. The storm hit that afternoon with a fury that seemed personal. Wind screamed around the house. Snow fell so thick Lydia couldn't see the barn. The boys pressed close to the windows, watching nature try to tear apart their world. Will the animals be okay? Ben asked, worried. They're in the barn, Ethan said. They'll be fine. But he kept checking the windows, and Lydia saw his jaw tighten each time the wind howled louder. This wasn't just a storm. This was the kind of weather that killed things. By evening, the temperature had dropped so low that frost formed on the inside of the windows. They all huddled near the stove, eating stew and trying to pretend the walls weren't shaking. Ben pressed against Lydia's side, and she wrapped an arm around him without thinking. Tell us a story, Ben said. About St. Louis. What kind of story? I don't know, anything. Just talk so we don't hear the wind. So Lydia talked. She told them about the Mississippi River, about steamboats and city streets, about buildings so tall they blocked out the sky. She told them about her father, about the school where she'd taught, about things she hadn't thought about in months. The boys listened, and even Sam seemed caught up in tales of a world so different from theirs it might as well be fiction. When she ran out of stories, Sam surprised her. Tell us about when you came here, he said. You know that story. You were there. Yeah, but tell it anyway, from your side. So she did. She told them about being hungry, about being scared, about walking up to the ranch and seeing Ethan for the first time. She didn't sugarcoat it, didn't make it romantic, just told them the truth. I thought I was going to die, she admitted. I was so cold, and I'd given up on finding help. Then I saw the smoke from your chimney, and I thought, maybe I don't have to die today. Were you scared of Pa? Ben asked. Terrified, Lydia said. He's big and serious, and he looked at me like I was something broken he might have to fix. Did you want to marry him? Sam asked. Really? Lydia glanced at Ethan, who was listening silently. I wanted to live, she said. Everything else was details. Do you wish you'd chosen different? Sam pressed. Do you wish you'd gone somewhere else? It was a loaded question, and they all knew it. The storm rattled the windows. The stove crackled. Lydia thought about the truth, about what these boys needed to hear. No, she said finally. I don't wish that. Why not? Sam's eyes were sharp, testing. Because I'm alive, Lydia said simply. Because I have work that matters. Because you two are learning fractions, and Sam makes terrible coffee, but he's trying. Because your father doesn't have to carry everything alone anymore. Because this is hard, but it's real. That's worth something. Sam looked away, but not before she saw his throat work. Ben snuggled closer. I'm glad you came, Ben whispered. Me too, Lydia said, and meant it. The storm lasted 3 days, 3 days of wind that never stopped, cold that seeped through every crack, snow that buried the world. They stayed close to the stove, rationed their wood, and waited it out. On the third night, the wind finally died. The silence was almost shocking after days of constant howling. Ethan checked outside, came back in with his face grim. Drifts are 6 feet high in places, he said. Need to dig out to the barn, check the animals. I'll help, Lydia said immediately. It's brutal out there. Then we'd better get started. They bundled up and stepped into a world transformed. Snow covered everything, smooth and white and deadly beautiful. The cold bit through layers of clothing. Ethan handed Lydia a shovel, and they started digging. It took hours. The boys helped when they could, but mostly it was Lydia and Ethan working side by side, moving snow, carving a path. Her arms burned, her back screamed, but she kept going. This was what it took to survive here. This was the price. When they finally reached the barn, they found the animals cold but alive, except for one of the cows who was lying down, breathing heavy and strange. She's pregnant, Ethan said, and she's in trouble. The first 2 weeks of marriage taught Lydia that she'd married a ghost. Ethan moved through the house like smoke, present but untouchable. He woke before dawn, worked until dark, came in only for meals that he ate in silence before disappearing back outside or upstairs to his room. When he spoke, it was instructions. The fence needs mending. The hay needs moving. Sam needs new boots when you go to town. Never anything personal. Never anything that acknowledged they were now bound together by law and paper and witnesses. The boys noticed. Of course they noticed. Uncle Ethan doesn't like you, Daniel announced one morning while Lydia was teaching him to write his numbers. Daniel? Sam hissed. What? He doesn't. He barely talks to her. Lydia set down the slate, chose her words carefully. Your uncle has a lot on his mind. Running a ranch is hard work. He talked to Ma more, I remember. I'm not your Ma. The situation is different. You're his wife, though, Sam said, watching her with those 2 old eyes. Aren't wives and husbands supposed to like each other? Sometimes, but your uncle and I have an arrangement, remember? We're partners in running this household. That's different from... She trailed off, unsure how to explain a marriage of convenience to children who'd only seen the real thing. Different from love, Sam finished quietly. Lydia's throat tightened. Yes. That's sad, Daniel said. It was, but Lydia had made peace with sad a long time ago. She threw herself into work instead of dwelling on it. The house responded to her attention like a starving thing finally being fed. She scrubbed floors until her knees ached, mended curtains that had been torn for months, reorganized the pantry with brutal efficiency. She found a rhythm with the boys. Lessons in the morning, chores after lunch, reading by the fire before bed. Sam was sharp as a tack, soaking up knowledge like he'd been thirsty for it. Mathematics came easy to him, and he had a memory that caught everything. Daniel was different. He learned through his hands, through doing. She taught him measurements by having him help with cooking, taught him letters by having him label the jars in the pantry. You're good at this, Sam said one afternoon, looking up from the book she'd given him on basic engineering. Teaching, I mean. I should be. I did it for 10 years. Why'd you stop? Really? Lydia considered lying, then decided these boys had been lied to enough. Because I taught children that some people thought didn't deserve teaching. Poor kids. Immigrant kids. Kids who didn't speak English well. The school board didn't like that. That's stupid. Your brother said the same thing. Sam's mouth twitched, almost a smile. We're not always stupid then. No, you're not. That evening, Ethan came in earlier than usual, his face tight with some unnamed frustration. He barely glanced at the table Lydia had set, at the stew she'd spent hours making, at the boys already seated and waiting. I'll eat later, he said, heading for the stairs. Ethan, Lydia's voice stopped him. Sit down and eat with your family. He turned slowly. I've got work. That can wait 30 minutes. Sit. Something dangerous flashed in his eyes. The boys went very still, watching. For a moment, Lydia thought he'd refuse, thought she'd push too far too fast. Then he sat, his movements stiff and reluctant. They ate in silence at first, just the scrape of spoons and Daniel's occasional slurping that Lydia corrected with a gentle touch to his arm. But halfway through, Sam spoke up. Miss Lydia's teaching me about bridges. Did you know there's different kinds? Suspension and arch, and that's good, Ethan said flatly. And she says maybe in spring we could build a small one over the creek, just for practice, and maybe. Sam deflated. Lydia felt something hot and sharp rise in her chest. The boys need more than maybe, she said quietly. They need you to care about what they're learning. Ethan's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. I care. Then show it. Ask Sam about his bridges. Ask Daniel what book he's reading. Be present for more than just meals. I'm working to keep this ranch running so we all have a roof over our heads. And I'm working to make sure that roof covers a home, not just a building. We both have jobs here, Ethan. Don't forget yours includes those boys. His jaw clenched so hard she could see the muscle jump. Don't tell me how to raise my nephews. They're my responsibility now, too. That was the agreement. They stared at each other across the table, the air crackling with tension. The boys looked between them like spectators at a boxing match. Finally, Ethan set down his fork and turned to Sam. Tell me about the bridges. Sam blinked, surprised. Really? Really? The boy launched into an explanation that was probably more detailed than Ethan wanted, but to his credit, he listened, asked questions, even corrected Sam's pronunciation of cantilever in a way that was helpful rather than harsh. When the boys went to bed, Lydia stayed in the kitchen cleaning up. She heard Ethan's footsteps on the stairs, then stopping, coming back. He appeared in the doorway, his expression unreadable in the lamplight. Don't do that again, he said. Do what? Challenge me in front of them. Lydia dried a plate slowly. I wasn't challenging you, I was reminding you what you signed up for. I know what I signed up for. Do you? Because from where I'm standing, you signed up for a housekeeper and a teacher, not a wife and not a partner. That's what we agreed to. No. We agreed to raise those boys together. Together means you don't get to shut down and disappear every time things get uncomfortable. He moved into the room, and Lydia was suddenly aware of how much bigger he was than her, how much space he took up. But she didn't step back. You don't know anything about what I'm dealing with, he said, his voice low and rough. Then tell me, why? So you can fix it? So you can organize it like you organized the pantry? So I can help carry it instead of watching you crush yourself under the weight. Something cracked in his expression. Just for a second, she saw past the wall to the exhausted, grieving man underneath. Then it was gone, locked away again. I don't need help carrying anything. Everyone needs help, Ethan. That's not weakness. That's being human. He turned away. I'm going to bed. Run away then. That's easier than staying. He stopped at the doorway but didn't turn back. You think you know me because we signed some papers? You don't. You don't know the first thing about me. I know you're drowning. I know those boys are watching you sink and they're terrified they're going to lose you too. And I know that whatever arrangement we have, it won't work if you keep treating me like a stranger you're forced to tolerate. Silence. Long enough that Lydia thought he'd just leave. Then, my wife died 3 years ago, Sarah. We'd been married 5 years when the consumption took her. I watched her fade for 8 months, watched her struggle to breathe, watched her beg me to make it stop when there was nothing I could do. When she finally died, I thought I'd buried any capacity I had for letting someone matter. Lydia's hands stilled on the dish she was washing. Then James and Margaret got sick, and I watched it happen all over again. 2 more people I cared about, gone. And now I've got 2 boys who need raising and a ranch that's barely holding together and a woman in my house who wants me to open up and be present when the only way I've survived is by staying closed off. He finally turned and his eyes were haunted. So forgive me if I'm not the partner you wanted, but I'm doing the best I can with what's left of me. He left before she could respond. Lydia stood in the kitchen, her hands in dishwater that had gone cold, and felt something shift in her understanding of this man. He wasn't cold because he didn't care. He was cold because he'd cared too much, and it had destroyed him. That night, she lay awake listening to the house, to Ethan's footsteps pacing upstairs, unable to rest. She thought about Sarah, about the grief that had carved him hollow, about the fear that must drive him, the terror of losing anyone else. She understood it, not from experience, but from observation. She'd seen it in her students' parents, in neighbors who'd lost too much. That desperate need to control anything, to prevent any more loss by simply not allowing attachment. But it was killing him, and it was hurting the boys. Something had to change. The snow started in late March, unseasonable and vicious. Not the gentle dustings they'd been getting, but a full storm that turned the sky white and the wind into a living thing that howled and clawed at the windows. Ethan had been checking the far pasture when it hit. He came back covered in snow, his face grim. "Lost the fence on the north side," he said, stripping off his coat. "Cattle scattered. I need to go back out, round them up before they freeze or get picked off by wolves." In this, Lydia looked at the window where snow was already piling against the glass. "Don't have a choice. There's a pregnant cow out there, nearly due. She won't survive the night without shelter." "Then I'm coming with you." He looked at her like she'd lost her mind. "No." "Yes. You can't do this alone, and you know it. You need someone to help drive them back. You can't ride in this weather." "I can ride. I grew up on a farm, Ethan. I'm not some delicate city woman. You'll freeze." "Then give me warmer clothes." They stared at each other, the storm screaming outside. Finally, Sam spoke up from where he'd been pretending to read. "She's right, Uncle Ethan. You can't do it alone. You almost didn't make it back last time." Last time. Lydia filed that away. Another thing he'd risked himself for without telling anyone. Ethan's jaw worked. "Fine. But you do exactly what I say when I say it. This isn't a debate out there. It's survival." "Understood." 20 minutes later, Lydia was dressed in clothes that had belonged to Margaret. Wool pants, 3 layers on top, a coat that was too big but warm. Ethan had given her his spare gloves and a hat that covered her ears. "Boys," she said, crouching down to their level. "We'll be back as soon as we can. You stay inside, keep the fire going. There's stew on the stove if you get hungry. Can you do that?" They nodded, eyes wide with worry. "And if we're not back by morning," Ethan started, but Lydia cut him off. "We'll be back by morning." The storm hit them like a fist the moment they left the barn. The horses balked, but Ethan had chosen the steadiest mares, and they pushed forward into the white. Lydia couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. The cold cut through every layer, found every gap, made her bones ache. But she kept moving, following Ethan's back through the swirling snow. They found the downed fence first, posts snapped clean through, wire tangled in the drifts. The cattle tracks led away, already half filled with fresh snow. "This way!" Ethan shouted over the wind. They followed the tracks for what felt like hours. Lydia lost feeling in her toes, then her fingers, even through the gloves. Her face went numb. She concentrated on breathing, on staying in the saddle, on not losing sight of Ethan. When they finally found the cattle, they were huddled in a small canyon, protected from the worst of the wind but trapped by drifts on either side. 12 head, including the pregnant cow, who was lying down in a way that made Ethan curse. "She's in labor," he said, dismounting. "In this storm. She won't make it." "What do you need me to do?" He looked at her, seemed to see her clearly for the first time since they'd left the house. Something in his expression shifted. "Can you help me pull the calf?" "Yes." It was brutal work in the freezing wind. The cow was in distress, the calf was breech, and Ethan's hands were too big for the delicate work needed. Lydia stripped off her gloves, ignoring the immediate bite of cold, and reached inside to turn the calf. She'd done this before, on her grandfather's farm when she was young, but never in a blizzard, never with her hands going numb, Never with stakes this high. Talk to her, Lydia said to Ethan. Keep her calm. He did, his voice low and steady, while Lydia worked. She felt the calf shift, found the front legs, guided them into position. The cow bellowed, straining. Now, Lydia said. Pull now. Together they pulled, and the calf came in a rush of fluid and blood that steamed in the cold air. It lay still for a terrible moment. Then Lydia cleared its nose, rubbed its chest hard, and it gasped, shuddered, and breathed. The cow turned immediately, lowing, licking her baby clean. The calf struggled to stand on stick legs, failed, tried again. Ethan was staring at Lydia like he'd never seen her before. How did you... Later. We need to get them all back before we freeze to death. They drove the cattle home through snow that had gotten worse, through wind that tried to knock them from their horses, through cold that made every breath hurt. By the time they reached the ranch, Lydia couldn't feel most of her body. She half fell from her horse, and Ethan caught her. Inside, he said, Now. He got her to the house, got the boys to help strip off her frozen outer layers, sat her by the fire. She was shaking so hard her teeth rattled. Daniel, get blankets. Sam, heat water for tea. Ethan's hands rubbed her arms, her legs, trying to restore circulation. You're hypothermic, you stubborn, crazy woman. Why didn't you say you were this cold? You were, too, she managed through chattering teeth. I'm used to it. So am I now. He made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. You saved that calf. You saved that cow. We saved them. The boys brought blankets, tea, and sat close to her like their warmth could help. Ethan kept rubbing her hands between his, and slowly, painfully, feeling returned. When she could finally speak without stuttering, she looked at him. Really looked at him. His face was raw from the wind, exhaustion carved into every line. But there was something else there, too. Something new. Thank you, he said quietly, for coming out there, for knowing what to do. I couldn't have done it alone. I know. Sarah couldn't ride, he said suddenly. She tried to learn, but she hated it. Hated being on the ranch, really. She only stayed because she loved me. Lydia waited, sensing he needed to say this. I thought that's what love was. Sacrifice. One person giving up everything for the other. But watching you out there tonight, working beside me, making the choice to come even though you were terrified, I wasn't terrified. You were. I saw it in your eyes before we left, but you came anyway. He was still holding her hands, she realized, still warming them between his. That's partnership. That's what I couldn't give Sarah, and what I thought I could never have again. Ethan, I'm not saying this right. I'm no good with words. He stopped, took a breath. What I'm trying to say is that maybe this arrangement doesn't have to stay an arrangement. Maybe it could be something else, something real. Lydia's heart was doing complicated things in her chest. What are you asking? I'm asking if you'd be willing to try, to make this a real marriage, not just a contract, to let me try to be a real husband instead of just a rancher who shares your house. The boys were watching with barely contained excitement. Daniel was practically bouncing. I came here for survival, Lydia said slowly. I married you because I needed a place to live and you needed help. I wasn't looking for love. His face fell, and she saw him start to retreat back behind his walls. But, she continued, holding his hands tighter, somewhere between scrubbing your floors and teaching your boys and birthing that calf in a blizzard, I think I found it anyway. Not because I was looking, not because it was part of the plan, but because you're a good man who's been broken by loss, and those boys are good boys who need a family, and this place is hard and brutal and beautiful, and I... She stopped, surprised by the tears in her eyes. I want to stay. Not because of a contract, not because I have nowhere else to go, but because this is where I choose to be. With you. With them. If you'll have me. If I'll have you? Ethan's voice was rough. Lydia, you're the best thing to walk into this house since... He couldn't finish, didn't need to. Instead, he did something he'd never done before. He pulled her close, wrapped his arms around her, and held on like she was the only thing keeping him anchored to the earth. The boys cheered, then piled on top of them both in a tangle of arms and blankets and laughter that turned into tears that turned back into laughter. And for the first time since she'd arrived at this frozen ranch with nothing but desperation and fear, Lydia felt something she'd thought she'd never feel again. She felt like she was home. That night, after the boys had finally gone to bed, still buzzing with excitement, after Lydia had changed into dry clothes and warmed completely through, she found Ethan standing at the window watching the storm that had finally started to ease. "I have something to tell you," she said. He turned and there was wariness in his eyes, old fear dying hard. "The school board in Denver. I didn't just leave because they dismissed me. They blacklisted me. Sent letters to every district in Colorado saying I was unsuitable for employment, that I had poor judgment, that I couldn't be trusted with children." She took a breath. "The reference letter I showed you? I forged it. I was desperate and I lied. And I need you to know that before we try to make this real." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then, "You taught kids nobody else would teach?" "Yes. And you got fired for it?" "Yes." "And you thought that made you unsuitable?" "The school board did." He crossed to her, took her face in his calloused hands. "Then the school board were fools. Any woman who'd risk her career to teach children who need it, who'd forge a reference out of desperation rather than give up, who'd ride into a blizzard to save a cow she didn't even know existed a month ago. That's not a woman with poor judgment. That's a woman with more courage than sense, and exactly the kind of woman these boys need." "Ethan, I'm not done. I've kept things from you too. This ranch is barely breaking even. I'm in debt to the bank in Bramble Creek. If we have another bad year, we might lose it. That's part of why I needed help. I can't afford to pay workers anymore. You married a man who might not be able to provide for you the way he should. I didn't marry you for money. I know that now. But you deserve to know anyway." He rested his forehead against hers. "So we're both liars. We're both desperate. We're both in way over our heads. Sounds about right. And somehow it's working. Somehow it is." Outside, the storm was dying. Inside, something new was being born. Not perfect, not easy, but real. Lydia thought about the path that had led her here. Every bad decision, every closed door, every moment of desperation that had pushed her further from the life she'd planned. And she realized that maybe the life she'd planned had never been the right one at all. Maybe the right life was this one. The one she'd found by accident in a frozen wasteland with a broken man and two half-wild boys in a ranch that was barely holding together. Maybe home wasn't something you planned for. Maybe it was something that caught you by surprise when you weren't looking, when you'd given up on finding it, when you'd settled for just surviving. And maybe love was the same way. "I'm going to fail at this sometimes," Ethan said quietly. "I'm going to close off, shut down, forget to be present. It's what I do when I'm scared. And I'm going to push too hard, demand too much, forget that not everyone processes things by organizing them into neat categories. It's what I do when I'm trying to control things I can't control. We're going to mess this up. Probably. But we'll try anyway? We'll try anyway." He kissed her then, tentative at first, like he'd forgotten how, then deeper, with this kind of desperation that came from people who thought they'd never get to feel this way again. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Lydia saw that his eyes were wet. "I'm not good at this," he whispered. "Neither am I. We'll figure it out together." And they would. Not perfectly. Not easily. But they would. Because that's what survival looked like sometimes. Not just enduring, but finding something worth living for in the middle of the hardest season of your life. The storm ended sometime before dawn. When Lydia woke, she found Ethan already up, but this time he'd left a note on the kitchen table. "Gone to check the cattle. Back for breakfast. E." It was something. A small thing, but something. The boys tumbled out of bed full of questions. Was it real? Were they really a family now? Could they call her Ma if they wanted to, or was that still off limits? "I think," Lydia said carefully, "that you should call me whatever feels right to you. If that's Miss Lydia, that's fine. If it's something else, that's fine too." "Ma," Daniel said immediately, testing it out. Sam was more cautious. "What if we call you Ma and then you leave?" "I'm not leaving. You promise?" Lydia knelt down, looked him straight in the eye. I promise. This is my home now. You're my family. That's not something I take lightly, and it's not something I'm going to walk away from. Even when things get hard, especially when things get hard. He studied her face, looking for lies, found none. Finally, he nodded. Okay, Ma. The word hit her harder than she'd expected. She pulled them both close, these boys who'd lost so much, and were choosing to trust her anyway, and felt something in her chest crack open. When Ethan came back, he found them making breakfast together, the boys chattering about the calf from last night and whether they could name it and how big it would get. He stopped in the doorway, watching, and Lydia saw the exact moment he realized what he was looking at. A family. Messy and imperfect and held together by choice rather than blood, but a family nonetheless. "Morning," she said, smiling. "Morning." He hung up his coat, and this time when he sat at the table, it wasn't reluctant. It was willing, present. It was a beginning. Not the beginning Lydia had imagined when she'd answered that advertisement. Not the safe, planned future she'd thought she wanted. But it was hers. And it was real. And for a woman who'd spent her whole life feeling like she was on the outside of everything looking in, that was more than enough. That was everything. Spring came late that year, fighting winter for every inch of ground. The snow retreated in grudging patches, revealing mud and dead grass and all the damage the cold had done. Fences sagged. The barn roof had developed a leak. One of the horses had gone lame. But inside the house, something was growing. Ethan started coming in for lunch, not just dinner. Started asking about the boys' lessons without prompting. Started leaving small things for Lydia, firewood stacked by the kitchen door without her asking, coffee already made when she woke up. Her coat moved closer to the stove so it'd be warm when she put it on. Small gestures, awkward ones sometimes, but they mattered. "You're trying," Lydia said one morning, watching him attempt to braid Daniel's hair before school lessons. "I'm failing," he muttered, the braid already coming apart in his hands. "Here." She moved behind him, her hands covering his, guiding. Loop it under, then over. Tight, but not too tight. He went very still at her touch. They hadn't talked about the kiss from that night after the storm. Hadn't talked about what trying to make this real actually meant in practical terms. They still slept in separate rooms, still moved around each other with careful politeness. But there were moments. Touches that lasted a second longer than necessary. Looks that carried weight. "There," Lydia said, finishing the braid. "See?" Ethan turned his head slightly, and suddenly they were very close. She could see the gray threading through the dark hair at his temples, the small scar above his left eyebrow, the way his eyes weren't quite slate. They had flecks of blue in them, almost hidden. "I see," he said quietly. Daniel squirmed between them. "Are you two going to kiss again? Sam said you kissed." "Sam talks too much," Ethan said, but his ears had gone red. "Sam sees too much," Sam called from the table, not looking up from his arithmetic. Lydia stepped back, flustered. "Let's focus on lessons, shall we?" But the moment stayed with her all day, warm and unsettling. That afternoon, while the boys were doing their reading, a rider appeared on the horizon. Lydia watched from the window as Ethan walked out to meet him. A thin man on a brown horse, dressed too fine for ranch country. They talked for several minutes, the stranger gesturing, Ethan's posture getting stiffer and stiffer. Then the man handed over an envelope and rode away. Ethan stood in the yard for a long time after, just holding that envelope. Finally, he came inside, his face carved from stone. "What is it?" Lydia asked. He set the envelope on the table like it might bite. "Bank. They're calling in the loan. I've got 90 days to pay what I owe or they take the ranch." The words landed like a physical blow. "How much?" $800. Lydia's breath caught. $800 might as well have been 8,000. "Can you sell cattle?" "Not enough of them, and prices are down. I'd have to sell the whole herd, and we'd still come up short." He sat heavily. "I knew this was coming. Been dodging it since James died. His medical bills ate through everything we'd saved, Margaret's too. The winter was hard, lost too many head. I thought if I could just hold on until spring, get the calving done, sell at better prices in the fall. But the bank won't wait. No." Sam had stopped pretending to read. "Are we going to lose the house?" Ethan's jaw worked. "I don't know, son." Where will we go? I said I don't know. The boy's face crumpled, and Lydia's heart cracked. She moved to Sam, pulled him close. Daniel followed, attaching himself to her other side. We'll figure something out, she said firmly. How? Ethan's voice was hollow. There's no figuring this out. I failed. I promised James I'd take care of his boys and the ranch, and I'm losing both. You haven't lost anything yet. We have 90 days. Lydia, there's no amount of cleaning or organizing that fixes this. The words stung because they were true. This wasn't something she could solve with elbow grease and determination. This required money they didn't have. That night, after the boys finally cried themselves to sleep, Lydia sat at the kitchen table with paper and pencil, making lists, assets, debts, possibilities. Ethan came downstairs to find her surrounded by calculations. What are you doing? Looking for options. She showed him her figures. If we sell the horse that went lame, the old plow, those tools in the barn you said were James's, that gets us maybe $50. We need $800. Then we need to find $750 more. She tapped the pencil against her teeth. What about loans from neighbors? Already owe Tucker money. Others are struggling same as us. Family? Got none left. Parents died years back. James was my only brother. Lydia stared at her lists, frustration building. There had to be something, some angle she wasn't seeing. I could go back to teaching, she said suddenly. Find a position in Bramble Creek, send wages back. You're blacklisted, remember? Maybe they wouldn't check references. Maybe Lydia. His hand covered hers, stopping her frantic writing. This isn't on you to fix. It's on both of us. That's what partnership means. Partnership means I don't drag you down with me. You should take that money I gave you, take the boys, go somewhere safe. Start over. She jerked her hand away. Absolutely not. Be reasonable. I am being reasonable. You're the one talking about giving up. I'm not giving up. I'm being realistic. I can't save this place. But I can make sure you and the boys are taken care of. We're a family now. Families don't split up when things get hard. Yes, they do. All the time. That's how the world works. Not our family. Lydia stood, her chair scraping loud in the quiet kitchen. You want to wallow in defeat? Fine. But I didn't survive everything I survived to give up now. There's an answer here somewhere, and I'm going to find it. She stormed to her room, slammed the door, then immediately felt childish for it. But she was too angry to apologize, too scared to go back out there and face the reality that maybe Ethan was right. Maybe there was no solution. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, and thought about the past few months. About how she'd arrived here with nothing. About how this place had become home despite everything. About those boys sleeping in the next room who'd already lost too much. About Ethan, who'd finally started letting himself hope again only to have it ripped away. No, she wouldn't accept it. There had to be something. In the morning, she woke to find Ethan already gone, out working like he could fix everything through sheer physical labor. The boys were subdued at breakfast, picking at their food. Are we really going to lose the ranch? Daniel asked quietly. Not if I have anything to say about it, Lydia said. But Uncle Ethan said, your uncle is scared. When people get scared, sometimes they give up before they've tried everything. We're not giving up. Sam looked at her with those two old eyes. What can we do? Good question. What could they do? The idea came to her while she was hanging laundry, watching the wind catch the sheets. The advertisement. The one Ethan had placed for a wife. If he could advertise for help, why couldn't she? Not for a wife, but for students. By noon, she'd drafted 3 letters to families in Bramble Creek, professional, careful, offering private tutoring services for their children, at the ranch or in town, at rates below what they'd pay a formal school. You're sure about this? Ethan asked that evening, reading over her shoulder. You have a better idea? It's $15 a month if you get all 3 families. That's not going to... It's 15 more than we have now, and if word spreads, maybe there will be more. He was quiet for a moment, then... You'd do this? Invite strangers here, teach their children, all for money that won't even come close to what we need? Yes. Why? She turned to face him. Because you saved me when you didn't have to. Because those boys deserve to grow up here, on their parents' land. Because this place is worth fighting for. Pick a reason. Something shifted in his expression. You really believe we can do this? I believe we have to try. He nodded slowly. Okay, then we try. The response came faster than Lydia expected. 2 of the 3 families said yes. The Hendersons had twin girls who needed tutoring and reading, and the Baileys had a son who was falling behind in mathematics. They'd start next week, 2 days a week, 3 hours per session, $30 a month. It was something, but it wasn't enough, and they both knew it. Lydia threw herself into preparations, cleaning the parlor until it shined, organizing materials, planning lessons. Ethan watched her work with an expression that was equal parts admiration and heartbreak. "You know this isn't going to save us," he said one evening. "Maybe not, but giving up definitely won't." He caught her hand as she passed. "I don't deserve you." "Probably not, but you're stuck with me anyway." He pulled her down to sit beside him on the sofa, something he'd never done before. "When I placed that advertisement, I thought I was looking for someone to help with chores and raise the boys. Someone practical, useful." "How flattering." "Let me finish. I didn't expect someone who'd fight like you fight, who'd see a problem and refuse to accept that it can't be solved, who'd look at this falling apart ranch and broken man and damaged boys and decide they're worth saving. You're not broken. I was. Maybe I still am in some ways, but you make me want to be less broken. You make me believe things can get better even when everything says they can't." Lydia's throat tightened. "Ethan, I'm saying this badly. What I mean is..." He stopped, frustrated with himself. "I'm falling in love with you, maybe you already have fallen. And I need you to know that before everything falls apart, because I might not get another chance to tell you." The words hung in the air between them. Lydia had known, on some level, that they were moving toward this, but hearing it said out loud was different. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I'm scared we're going to lose this place and everything we've built. I'm scared those boys are going to get their hearts broken again. I'm scared that I'm going to fail you." You couldn't fail me if you tried. I already lied to you. The reference letter was a desperate woman trying to survive." "I understand desperate." He cupped her face in his work-roughened hands. "I love you, Lydia Cole. However this ends, I need you to know that. You saved me. You saved those boys. You gave us a reason to hope again." She kissed him then, tasting salt and coffee, and something that might have been forever if they had the time for it. When they broke apart, both of them were shaking. "I love you too," she whispered. "I didn't want to, didn't plan to, but I do." Bad timing. The worst. They held each other on that worn sofa while the fire burned low and the future loomed uncertain, and somehow it felt like enough. The tutoring started the following week. The Henderson twins were delightful chaos, bright and loud and constantly finishing each other's sentences. Young Bailey was quiet and meticulous, the kind of student who absorbed information like a sponge. Lydia taught them in the parlor while Ethan worked and the boys did their own lessons in the kitchen. It was cramped and awkward, but it worked. The parents paid in cash, coins counted out carefully. Lydia added it to the small jar she kept hidden in her room, watching it grow with painful slowness. $30 a month, 90 days. They'd have $270 by the time the bank came, still more than 500 short. But word did spread. By the 3rd week, 2 more families had inquired, and Mrs. Henderson, grateful for her daughter's progress, sent over eggs and preserves and a bolt of fabric she said she didn't need. "It's not charity," she'd insisted when Lydia protested. "It's gratitude. You're helping my girls. Let me help you." Small things, but they added up. Then, 6 weeks into the 90 days, disaster struck. Lydia was in the barn with Daniel, teaching him about the chickens, when she heard Sam scream. She ran toward the sound, Daniel racing behind her, and found Sam on the ground near the woodpile. His leg was bent at an angle that made Lydia's stomach turn. Blood seeped through his torn pants. "I was stacking wood," he gasped, tears streaming. "The pile shifted, fell on me. I can't. Ma, it hurts." "I know, baby, I know. Don't move." She turned to Daniel, who stood frozen. "Daniel, listen to me. Run to the east pasture. Get your uncle, fast as you can. Go." The boy took off like a shot while Lydia examined Sam's leg. Definitely broken. Badly. And the bleeding wasn't stopping. She'd seen injuries like this before. Her grandfather had broken his leg similarly, and if it wasn't set right, if infection set in? No, she wouldn't think about that. She ran to the house, grabbed clean cloth, the bottle of whiskey Ethan kept for emergencies. Back to Sam, who was going pale, his breathing shallow. "Stay with me, Sam. Keep your eyes open." "It really hurts." "I know. I'm going to make it hurt more for a minute, but then it'll get better, I promise." She tore his pants to expose the wound, a deep gash above the break, dirt and wood splinters embedded in the torn flesh. If she didn't clean this now, before it swelled— "This is going to burn," she warned. Then she poured the whiskey over the wound. Sam's scream brought Ethan and Daniel at a run. Ethan took one look at his nephew's leg and went white. "We need to get him to town, to the doctor. There's no time. The leg needs to be set now, and this wound needs cleaning or he'll lose the leg to infection." Lydia's voice was steady, even though her hands were shaking. "I can do this, but I need you to trust me." "You're not a doctor." "No, but I've done this before. My grandfather taught me when I was young. We were too far from doctors, had to handle things ourselves." Ethan looked between her and Sam, who was crying quietly, trying to be brave. "Do it," Sam whispered. "Please, Ma. Don't let them take my leg." The Ma undid something in Ethan's face. He nodded. "What do you need?" "Daniel, get me the straightest, smoothest pieces of wood you can find. Ethan, I need rope, more cloth, and you're going to have to hold him down." They worked quickly. Lydia cleaned the wound as best she could, picking out splinters with steady hands while Sam bit down on a leather strap and Ethan held his shoulders. Then came the hard part. "On 3, she said, hands positioned on Sam's leg. 1. She pulled on 2 before he could tense up. The bone shifted back into place with a sound that made Ethan gag. Sam screamed, then went limp, unconscious from the pain. "Is he—" He fainted. Better for him. Lydia worked fast now, splinting the leg with the wood Daniel had brought, binding it tight, but not too tight. Then she bandaged the wound, hands moving with a certainty that came from muscle memory she didn't know she still had. When it was done, she sat back covered in Sam's blood, shaking so hard she thought she might fall over. Ethan stared at her. "Where did you learn to do that?" "My grandfather was a frontier doctor before he became a farmer. Taught me what he knew, said it might come in handy someday. I never thought—" Her voice broke. "I never thought I'd have to use it like this." They carried Sam to the house, settled him in bed. Lydia made a poultice for the wound, changed the bandages, checked his temperature every hour. The boy drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes lucid, sometimes feverish. For 3 days, Lydia barely slept. She kept vigil by Sam's bedside, monitoring for signs of infection, for fever that wouldn't break, for any indication that she'd failed. Ethan stayed close, helping however he could, watching her work with something like awe in his eyes. On the 4th day, Sam woke fully, clear-eyed, and asking for food. "The pain's less," he said, looking at his splinted leg. "You fixed it?" "I said it. It'll take weeks to heal properly. But yes, you're going to be fine." "Will I be able to walk?" "Once it heals, you'll walk just fine. Might be a small limp, but you'll manage." Relief flooded his young face. Then, "You saved my leg!" "I did what needed doing." "No." He reached for her hand. "You saved my leg. You could have just waited for the doctor. Let him decide. But you didn't. You fixed it yourself because you knew how and you weren't scared." "I was terrified. But you did it anyway." He squeezed her hand. "That's what brave means, Ma. Being scared and doing it anyway." Lydia's eyes burned. "Rest now. You need to heal." That night, she finally allowed herself to collapse. She'd canceled the tutoring sessions while dealing with Sam's injury, sent word that she'd resume the following week. The lost income made her chest tight with anxiety, but there'd been no choice. She sat at the kitchen table, too exhausted to move, when Ethan came to sit beside her. "You never told me you had medical training." "It wasn't training, just things my grandfather taught me. Things that saved my nephew's leg. Maybe his life." His voice was rough. "The doctor in town would have taken one look and amputated, said it was safer than risking infection. You knew better." "I took a risk. If I'd been wrong—" "But you weren't." He turned her to face him. "You keep saving us, over and over, and I keep wondering what we did to deserve you. You gave me a chance when no one else would. I gave you a contract. You gave us a family." He kissed her then, slow and deep, and Lydia felt something settle in her chest. This was real. Whatever happened with the bank, with the ranch, with their uncertain future, this was real and solid and worth fighting for. When they broke apart, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me again," he said. "What?" "The first ceremony was a business arrangement. I want to do it again, for real this time, in front of everyone, with the boys there, making promises that mean something beyond contracts and convenience. Ethan, we're already married, legally, but I want you to be my wife because you choose it, not because you needed to survive. I want to make vows I actually mean. I want—" He stopped, struggling for words. "I want to start over. Do it right this time." Lydia's heart was doing complicated things. "We're about to lose everything." "Maybe. Probably. But even if we do, I want you to be my wife when it happens. My real wife. My partner. My love. Will you marry me, Lydia? For real this time?" She should say no. Should tell him they needed to focus on survival, on practical matters, on saving the ranch. Should remind him that romantic gestures didn't pay bank debts. Instead, she said yes, because some things mattered more than practical. Some things were worth celebrating even when the world was falling apart. Some things were worth choosing over and over, no matter the cost. And this man, this family, this life, broken and difficult and uncertain as it was worth everything. The second wedding was nothing like the first. They held it on a Sunday afternoon in late April, when the last of the snow had finally surrendered and the prairie grass was just starting to show green. No formal invitations, just word spread through the small community. The Coles were renewing their vows, and everyone was welcome. Tucker and Helen came, of course. The Henderson family with their chattering twins. The Baileys, 3 other ranching families from within riding distance. Even old Mr. Peterson from the general store in Bramble Creek, who'd heard about Lydia's tutoring and wanted to see the woman who'd civilized the Cole boys. They gathered in the yard, chairs borrowed and mismatched, while Sam sat in a place of honor with his splinted leg propped up. Daniel had picked wildflowers, scraggly things, barely worthy of the name, but he'd arranged them in jars with such care that Lydia's throat had tightened when she saw them. Reverend Matthews officiated again, but this time his words felt different. Maybe because Ethan was actually listening. Maybe because Lydia wasn't thinking about escape routes and survival. "Marriage," Matthews said, his voice carrying across the yard, "isn't about perfection. It's about 2 imperfect people choosing each other, day after day, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." Ethan stood across from Lydia in his good suit, the one that was still too tight in the shoulders. His hands were scarred and calloused, freshly scrubbed, but with dirt permanently embedded in the creases. He looked terrified and determined in equal measure. Lydia wore a dress that Helen had helped her alter, pale blue cotton, that had belonged to Margaret. The boys had insisted she wear it, said their mother would have wanted it. The fit wasn't perfect, but it was clean and pressed, and it made her feel like maybe she belonged to something larger than herself. "Do you, Ethan Cole, take this woman to be your wife?" Matthews asked. Ethan's eyes never left Lydia's face. "I do, for real this time. Not because I need help or because it's practical, but because I love her. Because she makes me want to be better than I am. Because she saved me when I didn't even know I needed saving." That wasn't part of the traditional vows, but Matthews didn't correct him. "And do you, Lydia Cole, take this man to be your husband?" Lydia's voice was steady despite the tears tracking down her face. "I do. Because he gave me a home when I had none. Because he trusted me with his family. Because love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone worth fighting for. And he is. They all are." She glanced at the boys, both beaming. "Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you, well, you're already married, so I suppose I pronounce you married again." With feeling this time. Laughter rippled through the small crowd. Ethan pulled Lydia close and kissed her like they were the only 2 people in Montana territory. When they broke apart, the gathering erupted in applause and whoops. Helen had organized food. Everyone brought something. There was roasted chicken and biscuits and 3 different pies. Someone produced a fiddle, and there was dancing in the yard, couples spinning, while children ran between them shrieking. Tucker pulled Ethan aside at one point, and Lydia watched them talk, saw Tucker's expression grow serious. When Ethan returned, his jaw was tight. "What is it?" she asked quietly. Tucker asked about the bank situation. Offered to loan us what he could, but he's struggling too. Said most folks around here are. He looked around at their neighbors, at the people who'd come to celebrate with them. They're all just barely holding on. We'll find a way. Lydia, we will. But the clock was ticking. 60 days left. The tutoring money was adding up, but too slowly. They'd sold everything they could spare and some things they couldn't, still short by $400. That night, after the guests had left and the boys were asleep, Lydia sat at the kitchen table with her ledgers. The numbers hadn't changed from the last time she'd checked them, but she kept hoping she'd find some error, some overlooked asset. Ethan came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, rested his chin on her shoulder. "Come to bed," he said softly. She'd been sleeping in his room for the past 2 weeks, in the bed he'd shared with Sarah. It should have felt wrong, but somehow it didn't. Sarah was gone, and Lydia was here, and the dead didn't begrudge the living their happiness. "I can't. I'm missing something. There has to be something we're not seeing. Or maybe there isn't. Maybe we just have to accept that we tried everything and it wasn't enough." She turned in his arms. "You're giving up? I'm being realistic. We've got 60 days and $400 to find, short of a miracle. I don't believe in miracles. I believe in work and determination and refusing to quit. And I love that about you. But sometimes things are just impossible, and no amount of determination changes that. So what, we just wait for the bank to take everything? We pack up and leave without a fight? We pack up and start somewhere else. Together. The 4 of us. That's what matters. Not the land, not the house. The family." Lydia wanted to argue, but the exhaustion hit her all at once. She was so tired of fighting, of calculating, of hoping against hope that somehow they'd find a way. "I can't lose this place," she whispered. "I know it's just land and buildings, but it's the first place I've ever felt like I belonged. The first place that felt like mine. It'll always be yours. Even if we have to leave it behind, what we built here, that's yours. No bank can take that." He carried her to bed that night, and she let him, too tired to protest. They lay tangled together in the darkness, and for a few hours, Lydia allowed herself to stop fighting and just exist. Morning came too early, bringing with it a surprise. A rider arrived before breakfast, dressed in city clothes that were completely impractical for ranch country. He introduced himself as Mr. Whitmore, a lawyer from Denver. "I'm looking for a Mrs. Lydia Cole, formerly Lydia Cross," he said, removing his hat. Lydia's stomach dropped. The school board. They'd found her, sent someone to make trouble, to expose her forged reference and ruin whatever small reputation she'd built here. "I'm Lydia Cole," she said, chin up, prepared to fight. "I have news regarding the estate of one Dr. Marcus Cross." The name hit her like a physical blow. "My grandfather?" "The same. He passed away 3 months ago in Oregon Territory. I've been searching for you since, as you're listed as his sole heir." "Heir? He had nothing. He died broke, that's why I had to—" She stopped, aware of Ethan and the boys listening. Whitmore produced papers from his case. "That's not entirely accurate. Dr. Cross maintained a small practice until the end. He lived modestly and invested wisely. His estate, after debts and expenses, amounts to approximately $900. The kitchen went absolutely silent. "900? Lydia repeated numbly. "Yes, ma'am. I have the bank draft here. It requires your signature, and then the funds are yours." Lydia looked at Ethan, saw her own shock reflected in his face. $900. More than enough to pay the bank. Enough to save the ranch. Her hand shook as she signed the papers. Whitmore handed over the bank draft, tipped his hat, and rode away, leaving them standing in the kitchen staring at a piece of paper that changed everything. "Your grandfather," Ethan said finally. "The one who taught you medicine?" "Yes. I didn't even know he'd gone to Oregon. We lost touch after I moved to Denver. I thought—" Her voice broke. "I thought he'd died years ago, poor and forgotten." "He wasn't forgotten. He remembered you, left you everything he had." Sam hobbled over on his crutch. "Does this mean we get to keep the ranch?" "Yes," Lydia whispered. "Yes, it means we keep the ranch." Daniel whooped, and Sam grinned so wide Lydia thought his face might split. Ethan pulled her close, held her while she cried for a grandfather she'd loved and lost and who'd somehow saved her one final time. But even in her relief, something felt wrong, too convenient, too perfect. That night, she said as much to Ethan. I don't understand. My grandfather and I barely spoke the last 5 years. Why would he leave me everything? Because you were family. That's what family does. But $900, Ethan, exactly what we need, exactly when we need it. It feels like Providence? Like a story that's too neat. Real life doesn't work this way. Ethan pulled her close. Maybe it does sometimes. Maybe sometimes things actually work out. Can you accept that? Could she? Lydia had spent so long expecting the worst, planning for disaster, that good fortune felt suspicious. But the bank draft was real. She'd verified it at the bank in Bramble Creek, deposited it into their account. The debt was paid. The ranch was safe. She should feel nothing but relief. Instead, she felt unsettled, like waiting for the other shoe to drop. 2 weeks later, the lawyer returned. Mrs. Cole, I apologize for the intrusion, but there's been a development regarding your grandfather's estate. Lydia's heart sank. Here it was, the mistake, the problem that would take it all away. What kind of development? We found additional papers. It seems Dr. Cross left a letter for you. I thought it might have been lost, but it was filed incorrectly. My apologies for the delay. He handed her an envelope yellowed with age, her name written in shaky handwriting she recognized. After Whitmore left, Lydia sat alone in the parlor, afraid to open it. Finally, with Ethan beside her for support, she broke the seal. The letter was dated 2 years prior. My dear Lydia, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and Whitmore has finally tracked you down. That man never could file papers correctly, but he's honest, which counts for more. I heard about your trouble in Denver, news travels, even to old men in Oregon. I heard they blacklisted you for teaching children that society decided weren't worth teaching. I heard you lost everything because you did what was right instead of what was easy. I want you to know I'm proud of you, prouder than I ever managed to say when I was alive. The money I'm leaving you, I've been saving it since you were a girl. Always meant it for you, for when you needed it most. I had a feeling that day would come. Hoped I'd be around to hand it to you myself. But life had other plans. Use it wisely. Use it to build something good. And don't you dare feel guilty for accepting help. You're a cross, and we're stubborn as hell, but we're not fools. When someone offers you a hand up, you take it. You were the best thing about my later years, girl. Watching you grow, teaching you what I knew, seeing you become someone who cared about people others overlooked, that was my greatest pride. Don't waste time mourning me. I lived long and saw much. Instead, go live your life. Build your family. Help those boys you've taken in. Love that man you married. Yes, Whitmore told me you'd married. Took him forever to find you, but he's thorough. And Lydia? Stop waiting for disaster. Sometimes good things happen to good people. Let yourself have this. Your grandfather, Marcus Cross. Lydia read it 3 times through tears before she could speak. He knew, she whispered. He knew I'd need this. He was saving it for me all along. Ethan wrapped his arms around her. That's love, real love. Not the kind that demands perfection, but the kind that prepares for your needs before you even know what they are. She cried then, really cried, for the grandfather who'd seen her and known her and loved her enough to give her exactly what she needed when she needed it most. For the years they'd lost because she'd been too proud to reach out, for the fact that she'd never get to thank him. I didn't even get to say goodbye, she sobbed. You'll say it now. Every time you use that money to build something good here, every time you help someone because you can afford to, every time you teach a child others have given up on, that's how you say goodbye, by living the life he hoped you'd have. And so she did. The bank was paid in full. The threat lifted. But instead of just breathing in relief, Lydia and Ethan started planning. They fixed the barn roof, replaced the fence that had been sagging since before Lydia arrived, bought 2 new breeding cows and a stallion to improve their stock, set aside money for emergencies, for bad years, for the unexpected disasters that life on a ranch guaranteed. But more than that, they expanded the tutoring. Lydia turned the parlor into a proper classroom, taking on 6 students, then 8, then 12. Children whose parents couldn't afford formal schooling or who'd been turned away from the town school for various reasons Lydia refused to accept as valid. You're running a school for misfits, Ethan observed one afternoon, watching her teach reading to a group that included a little girl with a cleft palate, a boy who stuttered so badly the town teacher had called him unteachable, and twin brothers whose parents spoke only German at home. "I'm running a school for children," Lydia corrected. "Their circumstances don't make them misfits. Society's narrow-mindedness does." "And you're going to fix society?" "I'm going to teach children to read. Society can work out its own problems." Sam, nearly healed now, though he walked with a slight limp just as Lydia had predicted, helped with the younger students. He had patience and a knack for explaining things simply. Daniel, true to form, was already talking about becoming a veterinarian when he grew up, spending every spare moment with the animals. The boys flourished. Not perfectly. They still had nightmares sometimes. Still mourned their parents in small ways that broke Lydia's heart. But they were healing, growing, becoming themselves in a way they couldn't have if they'd been buried under grief and uncertainty. And slowly, quietly, the ranch became profitable again. Not rich. They'd never be rich, but stable, secure, enough. One evening in late summer, with the boys asleep and the house quiet, Ethan found Lydia on the porch watching the sunset paint the prairie gold. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, settling beside her. "About how different everything is from a year ago. How I came here desperate and broken, ready to do anything to survive. And now? Now I'm not surviving, I'm living. There's a difference." He took her hand, calloused thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Tell me." "Surviving is just enduring, getting through each day without thinking about tomorrow. Living is choosing, planning, building something you care about with people who matter. And the school, is that part of living? It's the best part. Those children, they're like I was. Smart and capable, but overlooked because they don't fit someone's narrow definition of worthy. Teaching them, watching them learn and grow and realize they're not broken." She stopped, emotion thick in her throat. "That's everything my grandfather gave me. The understanding that everyone deserves a chance, regardless of where they come from or what they look like or how they speak. He'd be proud of you." "I hope so. I hope he knows somehow that the money he saved, the sacrifices he made, they mattered. They saved more than just this ranch. They saved a family. They're saving those children." Ethan pulled her close. "You know what I think?" "What?" "I think you would have found a way to save us even without his money. Maybe it would have taken longer. Maybe we would have lost the ranch and had to start somewhere else. But you would have made it work. Because that's who you are, someone who refuses to give up on people who need her." "I wanted to give up sometimes." "But you didn't, that's what counts." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky fade from gold to pink to purple. In the barn, the animals settled for the night. In the house, the boys dreamed of tomorrow. And here on the porch, two people who'd married out of desperation held each other and marveled at how something that started as pure survival had transformed into love. The school continued to grow. By fall, Lydia had 15 students and had to start holding classes in shifts. Parents paid what they could, sometimes in money, sometimes in trade. The Millers sent vegetables. The Johnsons helped with repairs. The Hendersons spread word to other families, and soon Lydia had a waiting list. "You need a proper schoolhouse," Ethan said one evening, watching her try to manage 3 different lessons in 3 different corners of the parlor. "We can't afford that. What if we could?" He showed her the plans he'd been working on. A small building, nothing fancy, but big enough for 20 students. One room with a proper stove, windows that actually opened, desks he could build himself. "Ethan, this would cost less than you think if we do most of the work ourselves." And Tucker said he'd help. So did Henderson and Bailey. They want their kids to have a real school too. "But the ranch? The ranch is doing fine. Better than fine. We can afford this." Lydia looked at the plans, at the care he'd put into drawing them. "You really think we should do this? I think you've got 15 children crammed into our parlor, and a waiting list of 20 more. I think you're doing something important here, and it deserves a proper space. And I think—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I think this is what your grandfather's money was really for. Not just saving the ranch, but building something that matters." Construction started in October. The men worked on weekends and evenings, sawing and hammering, while Lydia and the other women prepared food and kept them supplied with coffee. The children watched in fascination as their school took shape. rough lumber becoming walls, becoming a roof, becoming windows, and a door, and finally, a small bell tower that Daniel insisted they needed. By November, it was finished. One room, 20 desks, a blackboard that Ethan had ordered from Denver as a surprise, shelves for books that the community had donated. Simple and practical and absolutely perfect. They held a dedication ceremony on a cold Saturday morning. The whole community turned out, students and parents, neighboring ranchers, even people from Bramble Creek who had heard about the woman teaching children no one else would teach. Reverend Matthews blessed the building. Tucker gave a speech about the importance of education, and then Lydia stood before the crowd, this woman who'd arrived broken and desperate and alone, and said words she'd never imagined she'd get to say. This school is for every child who needs it. No one will be turned away because of how they speak, or where they're from, or what challenges they face. Everyone deserves a chance to learn. Everyone deserves to be seen and heard and valued. That's what we're building here. Not just a school, but a community that believes every child matters. The applause was thunderous. And when the children filed into their new classroom for the first time, their faces full of wonder and pride, Lydia had to turn away to hide her tears. That night, she lay in Ethan's arms, exhausted and happy in a way she'd never imagined possible. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For taking a chance on a desperate woman with a forged reference and nothing to offer." "You offered everything. I was just too stubborn to see it at first." "We were both stubborn. Still are, probably always will be." She smiled against his chest. "The boys asked me something today." "What?" "If we were going to have more children, brothers or sisters for them." Ethan went still. "What did you say?" "I said that was a conversation I needed to have with you first." "And what do you want?" Lydia thought about it, really thought about it. A year ago, she would have said no without hesitation. Children meant permanence, meant risk, meant tying yourself to a future you couldn't control. But now? "I want a family," she said quietly. "A big, messy, complicated family that's built on choice and love instead of blood and obligation. I want the boys to have siblings. I want to fill this house with noise and chaos and life. Even knowing how hard it'll be, how much work, how little sleep, how many things can go wrong. Especially knowing that, because I also know what it looks like when things go right, when a family chooses each other every single day despite the difficulties, when love is stronger than fear." He kissed her then, slow and deep, and Lydia felt the last piece of her past fall away. She wasn't running anymore, wasn't hiding, wasn't just surviving, she was home. Finally, truly home. Winter came early that year, hard and cold, but inside the ranch house and the small schoolhouse beside it, there was warmth, laughter, the sound of children learning, of family growing, of a community being built on the foundation of people who believed everyone deserved a chance. On Christmas morning, Lydia woke to find Ethan already awake, watching her in the gray dawn light. "What?" she asked, self-conscious. "Just thinking about how different this Christmas is from last year." Last Christmas, he had been alone with two traumatized boys in a falling-apart house, drowning in debt and grief. Last Christmas, she'd been in a Denver boarding house, eating thin soup and wondering if she'd make it to the new year. Now they were here, together. A family that had been forged in desperation and doubt, but had become something real and solid and worth everything. "Tell me something," Ethan said. "If you could go back to that day, the day you saw my advertisement, knowing everything that would happen, all the hardship and fear and struggle, would you still come?" Lydia didn't have to think about it. Yes. 1,000 times yes. Because this, she gestured at the house around them, at the boys sleeping in the next room, at the life they'd built together. This is worth every hard moment it took to get here. Even the blizzard where you nearly froze? Even that. Even thinking we'd lose everything? Even that. Even marrying a stubborn rancher who didn't know how to love anymore. She cupped his face in her hands. "Especially that, because you taught me something I didn't know I needed to learn." "What's that?" "That sometimes the things we think will destroy us are actually saving us. That desperation can lead to purpose. That the worst moments of our lives can become the doorway to the best ones. That family isn't about blood, it's about choice. From the other room came a crash, then Daniel's voice. Sam, you knocked over the stockings. Did not. You did. Did too. Lydia and Ethan looked at each other and laughed. Welcome to family, he said. Wouldn't trade it for anything, she replied. They got up together, went to break up the argument, to make breakfast, to open the simple gifts they'd made or traded for. The boys raced around in new socks and shared a wooden horse Ethan had carved. There was porridge with honey and precious oranges Tucker had brought from town, and laughter that filled every corner of the house. Later, after the boys had gone out to check on the animals, Ethan handed Lydia one more gift. What's this? She asked, looking at the small wooden box. Open it. Inside was a deed, the title to the ranch, now bearing both their names. Equal partners, equal owners. You didn't have to do this, Lydia whispered. Yes, I did. This is your home as much as mine, your land, your legacy to build on. She threw her arms around him, this man who'd offered her a cold contract and somehow given her the world. Outside, snow fell softly on the prairie. In the schoolhouse, desks sat waiting for Monday's lessons. In the barn, animals rustled and settled. And here in this house that had been falling apart when Lydia arrived, a family celebrated their first real Christmas together. It wasn't perfect. Sam's legs still bothered him sometimes. Money was always tighter than they'd like. The school needed more supplies. The ranch needed constant work. There were arguments and frustrations and days when everything felt like too much. But it was real, and it was theirs. And it was enough. Years later, when people asked Lydia about how she'd built her school, about how she'd saved the ranch, about how she'd created this family from nothing, she never knew quite how to answer. Because the truth was complicated. It wasn't just one thing, not the money from her grandfather, not the blizzard that had broken down walls, not the tutoring or the hard work or the desperate determination. It was all of it, every piece, every hard choice and lucky break and moment of grace that added up to a life worth living. But if she had to choose just one answer, it would be this. She'd learned that survival wasn't the goal. Living was. Building something you cared about with people who mattered. Choosing love over fear, over and over, even when it seemed impossible. Especially when it seemed impossible. Because in the end, that's what saved them all. Not money, not luck, not convenience. Just the simple, difficult, beautiful choice to keep choosing each other, day after day, no matter what came. And that, stubborn and imperfect and absolutely human, was enough to build a life on. More than enough. It was everything.